Okay, this is Not Having Fun episode 3, featuring the multimedia artist Chip McCall. I had been meaning to have the studio visit for so long that I actually decided to visit his studio in person to conduct this, alright, so not so formal interview there. Enjoy.
Alright. I guess at their most core material level, they're polyurethane foam. But like these two chunky boys, the kind of tank ones, are actually made up of anything I have lying around. So like, just from a material basis, like I don't know, man. I take a lot of notes. I collect a lot of stuff. I'm a bit of a hoarder. I don't like to throw things out, so I have bags and buckets full of cut paper, images, trash, stuff from the internet. Stuff pulled from Instagram or some 4chan stuff or Reddit or any of the Google image search images. So
it's kind of like a combination of material accumulation, like digital image accumulation, right?
Yeah, I mean the first one, which is the smaller boy there, the chunkier one. You see right yonder, propane tank. So that was, I mean, when I was at Chautauqua over the summer, I was working on that urinal back there, and I was working on the actual, photorealistic propane tank, a bunch of other things, and I was taking notes, many of which are on the wall. And I didn't throw out most of my trash or anything. I just sort of collected a lot of all the fall off from all the stuff, all the research I was doing, literally the cut aspects of that wound up on the floor, I kept. Yep. And at the end of the whole thing, I had made a mold, essentially out of styrofoam, which itself was left over from another project I was working on. I just dumped everything in there, and it made that kind of, cylinder or vase object with the things coming out of the top. And so the whole process of, I guess, doing the investigative side of my work, which is just looking at the internet, there's not really anything smart about it. All of that, all the stuff, all the runoff from that was just worked back into the project itself. This sort of Ouroboros thing where all the time spent trying to figure out how to make something, all the things that come from that are sort of recycled back into the thing that I'm trying to figure out how to make. The foam and the polyurethane served as just a binding material. Yeah. It's like a forced history almost. It's me demanding some kind of physical representation of my time spent. Mm-hmm. Whether it be the labor of my practice or for on a more personal level, just a recognition of what I've been doing or the passage of time or the way that I've spent it. Some kind of validation, You get this whole professionalized mindset that you have to have some sort of something to show for your time or how you use your time for your products, Survival objects is kind of like a primary way to describe maybe some of, whether it be fuel canisters or cleaning supplies or propane specifically. That's kind of like a COVID resultant object.
The thing that I really love about your work, along with David's work, is how the material and the imagery also communicates with the meaning, mm-hmm. or the significance of it. And it's something that I always admired, and something that I try to do myself. But it all fits the story. Yeah. It's not doing an oil canvas painting of something that's debased. I mean, beautifying the image. Yeah. It's everything is kind of together in its own sort of realm. So the polyurethane with the tribal tattoo transfer creates this neat circle.
When you look at your studio practice and how much of this is for you or for me, yourself personally, how much is for the actual production of an object or whatever. The whole thing's kind of masturbatory, I guess, right? And so sometimes it is just my own personal record keeping of thoughts and ideas and to have it be a direct representation of the process of having made the thing, some of it kind of quite literally bubbles to the surface and you can see it. And I do really, really like when that happens. There's a randomness to that. And so some of the information is preserved. This one ain't done yet. I got some work to do. I want to do, like you mentioned, some of the superficial and like Sgraffito editions.
Uh-huh.
Barbed wire and prayer hands, a couple more Hunter Biden images, and
Okay. All right. So I mean, like, what's the Hunter Biden?
Man.
Like, besides just like a prodigal fucked up son, like.
Well, yes, I guess the prodigal fucked up son is funny beyond like the very surface value. So initially, like, you're a pretty online person, right? I kind of am too. I spend a lot of time like foraging around. There are individuals and stories, whether they be conspiratorial or political in nature, but that sort of act as conduits within these online subcultures for people to rally around, you know. And Hunter Biden, as an example, like in the lead up to the election, became a bit of a hot topic for a while. You know, there's all those the image dump that was released of. So apparently, like years back, he had a problem with the laptop. He sends it to some fixer guy, and somehow or another, years down the line, somehow both the FBI and Rudy Giuliani, of all people, end up with, you know, swankish images of like brothers, like him getting a foot job, him smoking crack, a lot of ones of him smoking crack, which is like, I don't know why he would. But yeah, so there are like thousands of these images, and Rudy Giuliani tried to use it as blackmail. He bought it from presumably some Ukrainians. There's a big market there for professionally damaging imagery.
Yes.
It's like a huge black market
like incriminating or blackmail-worthy photographs.
Right, particularly in Ukraine. Like, apparently the Hunter Biden...
is that, like, there's, like, weird cottage industries of different countries that, like, specialize.
Yeah.
It's like the Nigerian prince.
It's a Nigerian prince.
It's like, it's not based on fantasy. It's like Nigeria has that's industry.
Like their industry of weird online crime.
Yeah.
Right? And so those are the things that interest me. But within the Ukraine, like, there apparently is a huge industry for online blackmail.
Uh-huh.
I may be wrong, but that's what I heard. And ironically enough, Hunter financially is engaged with the Ukrainian government, now the Chinese government to some degree. He was CFO or one of the directors of a financial equity company that would invest in various multinational corporate interests, and they got very involved in after the I don't want to call it a revolution, but what happened in Ukraine years ago. This company that Hunter Biden is financially involved with was basically sent in there to act as sort of a proxy advisor for a nationalized oil company that was worried about being looked into for corruption. You know, right? And so they like, well, if we bring in some hard-hitting American politically linked financiers to look over this whole thing, like, will be good. And now those industries he's involved with are facilitating deals between Ukraine, China, America, all arms industry stuff. Sketchy shit. But point being, it's ironic then it's in Ukraine also that Hunter Biden, all these pictures of him getting a foot job are up for sale on the black market for $3 million. Rudy Giuliani ends up with it somehow and dumps it.
I mean, he's got to do something, right?
That guy. And that's a whole nother... He was America's mayor for like years after 9/11. And we can talk about... 9/11 is a topic that interests both you and I. In terms of like cultural zeitgeist and like the kind of pervading hypnosis that we enter into.
Or the fact that just there was a clear... It's like obvious, but there was a clear cultural shift from that point.
Yeah.
Where it's like things started getting more seditious and things started getting more, what would be the word, pernicious. So I think that would, to me, 9/11 is like the marking point from where online culture was the end of the utopian idea.
Right.
Of like being connected will benefit everyone. And started becoming like being connected would be harmful for everyone.
Oddly enough, a couple years after.
Which kind of ties into the
.com. Yeah. Well, so right. Now, I mean, the internet now is this like, you know, like early 90s pre-.com bubble internet. Not that the financial crash of the internet, not that they're linked, but there was this sort of techno-utopian idea, which a lot of those sort of technocratic politicians still live by, that we can solve everything with these very fancy systems or algorithms or whatever. And eventually, no, you end up with like the deep web and smut porn and all the many like rabbit holes of Reddit and all this stuff. The whole
I'm just saying, like, I don't think it's as vicious as I think people make it.
No. Like, I don't think it is either, and I don't think it should be looked at as like an evil. I don't think good and evil are like things, but there is this view now by like a lot of the like sort of academic liberal class that like, oh, we need to police the internet now because like, look at all the bad on the internet and look what it did. It got Trump elected. And, the malicious nature of it is destroying people, and there's a lot of truth to that. That people's lives have certainly not really been made better, maybe in a lot of degrees, by this intercommunicative like web we have. Anyway, I get a lot of fucking pictures from those weird undercurrents of the internet.
I mean, I think I like Parker Ito's work. I really like Parker Ito's work, but it's like I like the stuff they did after this idea of depicting the internet. That was some of his stuff earlier. This like besides the agony, the ecstasy, which was like the big auction shit.
Yeah,
this idea of like collecting the internet is always it's like a little cheesy.
Yeah.
But something about these is like it doesn't have that idea, but it still has a similar vibe.
Yeah.
Or change those two terms around. It's like
a lot of that's not there, but enough of this whirls around like somehow within like the mental space of like the zeitgeist of the general community that like maybe it reveals itself in ways. I like the idea of these not necessarily as like narrative pieces, but that there is some like maybe not discovery, but aspect of cultural archaeology or maybe a demand for narrative. The weird thing about the internet for me, and I started thinking about a lot of this like post-COVID, is how alone we are in a lot of ways, and how so much of these narratives that we really latch onto are not much more than that, just an attempt to have something to latch onto, to have some sort of like
just to make sense of something,
right? Because
because like you can apply a theme to a narrative. Otherwise, it's just a series of random events.
Right. The world's fucking absurd. Like the whole the
there's no like within
late capitalist America.
Yeah, within the frame of that, it's like you're never really gonna go on a big adventure.
No,
you're never going to identify with these like big.
You're not gonna have much of we grew up watching X-Men and the Lord of the Rings and
like Harry Potter and shit like that.
Yeah,
you make
thoughts on Harry Potter. Yeah, but we're not gonna have that. I mean, I specifically remember one time watching I was probably like 11. I went to see X-Men 1 in the theaters, and I remember when I would have to leave the bathroom or leave the movie to go to the bathroom, I would think or pretend for a period like I was a character in that. Like I had some power, had something I didn't have, some future that wasn't ever going to happen or whatever. That's just fantasy. That's me trying to make a fancy way to explain fantasy. But people still have that, and we're fed that constantly. It's commodified to a degree. We're not ever going to get any of that. You're not going to be this sort of like grandiose idea of your own like glory or whatever,
right?
Like fucking what were we talking about earlier? So dying in a shootout. The drunk coach like dying in a bar fight. Yeah, like the reality for most people, and why that shouldn't sound
like an alcoholic pugilistic coach meeting his final end at a bar fight.
Yeah, that should not at all sound appealing. The fucked up thing is that it kind of does. Yeah. Like there's part of me that's like, oh hell yeah, like the drunk baseball coach dies in a glorious bar fight.
Yeah.
The reality for most people is that a lot of their life will go on and nothing will ever happen. Mm-hmm. It'll be a continuation of the same, and there's happiness in that or whatever, but we look for a lot more, and we look for these mythologies or these stories around ourselves, and they're not there, and we can make them on the internet. We create conspiracies a lot of the time, or we find, I guess that's one of the real interest points, is that these maybe not forced, but where we find community now, whether it be QAnon or any of the like many other internet-derived subcultures that we look for a sense of belonging in, it's all derived from like the same loneliness or alienation we have from each other.
Yeah.
Most of which is driven by like this sort of forced self-reliance and independence that we're all preached our entire life. Like you have to be a professional and you do things on your own. You have to be able to support yourself and make all your own things. And that's when I started like making, trying to think of like how an entirely like a truly like on a material basis solipsistic lifestyle would look when I make versions of all the things I've been told I need to have to survive without anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how do I get fuel? How do I clean my things? How do I piss?
Yeah.
What do I have around me to like validate myself? You know, which is why it's just a bunch of 2x4s and propane tanks in here. Apparently that's all you need, but
I'm really interested in like building your own sort of survival mechanism. In a way.
yeah.
It's kind of like I don't need to talk about Kincaid too much, but just I'll edit it out. But one of the things, what sort of the is like the way that I'm working now is a branch off of the initial investigation. Even though it's involved, it's just like a way of giving it character.
Yeah.
You know, and but it's actually sort of about kind of autonomy to me.
Yeah.
And a little bit about man as animal, man as child, you know, those type of, and like the ramifications of autonomy or manhood within that.
Yeah.
And so like that's why I had those hearts, you know, those small gifts,
mm-hmm.
and they were like painted and they were done in like a fucked up child's crafts way. It felt like a horrible thing that your kid would come home with.
You gotta put it on the fridge.
Yeah. Son of a bitch.
Fuck.
Son of a bitch is fucking...
Yeah, god damn it. We gotta put it... I can't wait till this motherfucker gets out of here.
Yeah. It relates to that in a way.
Yeah.
And some of the gift bag ideas that I do is like... Or like the dog beds.
Well, there's an idea of like comfort in that.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lot, you know... I don't know if I ever, or many people ever... truly got beyond adolescence, you know.
Yeah.
You still
it's
want
sort of reflecting on like it's like abstract, and like I'm gonna be doing these. I did a painting of Teresa Earnhardt, you know, and I like this abstract maternal figure.
Yeah,
that's like a businesswoman.
Oh yeah, the girl boss. Yeah,
yeah. Also, that's an example of like providing for yourself, making your own mother figure.
Right. Yeah.
Giving yourself your own gifts, you know. And like how
get your own care package,
and that strange idea of like what that means.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about this is though that's really interesting to me is that it kind of this work is like branching out. It's connected, but I think it's better suited for what issues you were having regarding your earlier work, where it was seen as a self-exotification of like the South, the American South.
Yeah,
but these have like these kind of carry along the same style. It's just like the lens is shifted,
mm-hmm.
the position is shifted, and I think that's a good thing. It's like you don't have to ask that question anymore. I still laugh about that. I think you wrote it down that like the guy who keeps posting on Facebook Enter Sandman.
Yeah, bro. I heard that somewhere. I thought it was the funniest fucking thing. It was like
it's so
some motherfucker that like puts up on their Facebook story like Metallica Enter Sandman with like the video, and it's like y'all
hear this shit?
Everyone heard Enter Sandman. Like I could open my window at any time of day and hear someone playing Enter Sandman somewhere.
Yeah, this guy's like it's just like
the person that thinks they just discovered Enter Sandman
yeah.
Or they didn't, or they just thought it was so sick that like this is how older people are on Facebook, and I really there's something like both sincere and it brings a shudder of like human emotion to me, but like also really alien and off-putting, like how older people interact with the internet. It's so fucked up.
It's so weird and shameful. It's like because it's weird and shameful to think like having myself no preconception at all of being cool online
mm-hmm.
to all of a sudden be unhip. You know, it's like this was never something that was in my baggage,
right?
And then all of a sudden you find it there.
Well, that was what sucks about the internet, and is what a real big roadblock for me and how I interact with it, and something I can't quite get over is that like people, whether it's our age or whatever, like the idea of being cool and like existing within the hip aura is important for people of our generation, and you tailor and kind of curate your.
It's kind of like for some people that's all they have.
It is what I think for a lot of people it's all they have.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it also reminds me of like it's like, you know, I love disco,
yeah,
and you trying to find things below the surface of
Uh-huh.
disco. It's like you're like I swear to God, there's got to be like a really amazing jam that they just couldn't get out because they were based in like Minneapolis,
right?
And
I'll find it,
and they made like 50 pressings of this album, and most of them just went in the trash, you know. And then it's like it's this thing of wanting to be a connoisseur. of it, or wanting to gain a greater knowledge of it that's not, the ones that you hear all the time are classics for a reason. But you want to know the next thing. You want to find the undiscovered classic because you can't just be out here playing fucking Casey and the Sunshine Band because everyone knows that. You know what I mean?
You want to be a connoisseur, and that comes with a sort of validation. I think maybe that's what the real. I want to be validated somehow. Mm-hmm. I want to be, so someone's going to be looking through your story and they're going to hear this disco song that you found and be like, oh, wow, good for Kevin. And then the reality is that like that for them, for the third party, the recognition immediately dissipates.
And that's another. Oh, sorry,
it's gone.
It's also like you do that because it's like trying to gain approval.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And like if there was no sort of idea of online shame, then then there wouldn't be, or like a self-consciousness around it, then it wouldn't be an issue at all.
Right.
But because there's this weird sort of like mental pressure on yourself to look like you know more about it, that's what separates, I guess, us from the other generation. Because because it's like, I don't think they give a shit.
Well, they got a 3-car garage and like a family. So the fuck does it matter?
Yeah.
I got a bunch of medical debt and college debt and not very much outside of that. A couple good relationships. Some jokes every now and again. Yeah. But that
it's got like my zingers and my art.
Yeah, I got my zingers every now and again. I have some moderate art. I mean, I think the approval or the affirmation that's like my rosebud. Like that's. And maybe a lot of people's, that's what underlies your habits within the world. To try to seek some sort of affirmation.
And I guess there's also that weird sort of, I don't know if it's for you, but sometimes like I feel, because it's like, I have my art career, which I have a idea,
quote unquote,
which I have an idea of how this is going, but at least I have total control over. It's like you produce or you don't.
It might be the only thing. Yeah.
In terms of like what I'm doing at the moment. Yeah. It's like I have control over this piece, and then I have my corporate job where I have no control. Where it feels like I feel like.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think that's that lack of power and like the lack of control and power and a sort of sense of floating alienation that it seems a lot of people have within their day-to-day like labor existence is a real problem I have with our current state of being. This kind of like helplessness and this aloneness that
like solitary.
Yeah,
it's not about solitary. It's like because you're with people.
You're with people, but there's something like
a real feeling of being alone, like
something
alone in a crowd in a way.
Right, being separated from. I mean, I guess alienation by definition. Like being separated, you are removed from so much of what you do for the majority of your waking hours, and so for. Within the studio, it is occasionally this can be a reclamation of
way of asserting, sort of
asserting like some control over yourself or how you spend your time.
That's how I think.
And I feel a need then to like categorize and record it and make. Again, I always say masturbatory, but like that is a very kind of like.
It's like, just thinking about that. I'm thinking about like how funny it is that like. To reclaim a sense, because I feel that like reclaim a sense of alienation with your studio practice.
Yeah,
and I choose to make work about being helpless.
Well, I do the same thing because it interests me. Like this can't. I want it to actually like exist in the world somehow. And if I'm sitting here trying to talk about ideas of social alienation and working class woes and the discontent and anger and lack of accessible history or knowledge of self that exists within the socially discarded people, this frustration that it seems to be the result of our sort of forced separation, our this loneliness and all these like many things that surround our existence. Like if I want that to be the people I would like to have discourse with that about are like people...
Probably not art people.
Well, I mean, but like, I think a lot of art people, like, because a lot of like art people have to work shitty fucking art jobs, doing art handling for minimum wage or being an unpaid intern at a museum or some bullshit. But and
Work
so
at NBC.
working at NBC or having any of the like dozens of shitty jobs that like people we know work all the time.
Yeah.
Like I want to say the frustration is relatable to those people, but art, once it's professionalized and enters into the realm that it's actually viewable by the majority of the populace, like plenty of people make art like me here in a basement and no one sees it ever. And I can talk to people about this and maybe they could see it if I had a pop-up show somewhere, not happening right now because COVID, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. But actual art as it's understood by people and exists out in the world is usually relegated to like a very professional gallery space. And that's only accessible to people that economically and maybe the more...
And I wonder if like how many people actually like that are outside of the art space feel like that's actually something they can enter into.
Right, a lot of them don't. They're like, oh, it's some bullshit. Any of the stuff that I'm talking about, once it goes to that level, it means it's devoid of meaning. It doesn't mean anything to those people. Like it's not, they're essentially like, you know, trash porning or whatever. It's fetishized.
Yeah. Like
they're like, oh, you know, the labor, anyway, like it doesn't. And so that's the frustration. I say I want it to be democratic in a sense. Like I want it to be accessible, not strictly through the current existing, like, frankly, like not necessarily undemocratic, but like very academic or intellectually, monetarily elite organizations of the art world. Like that's the only way you get to see art at the high level is if you've somehow entered into that realm. And people that are outside of that realm either don't give a shit about it or they're not let through the door. And so all this stuff I'm talking about, you know,
I just think that like for me the idea of accessibility and like of course like my work is based on things that anyone can grab, and like that's the thing. It's like you know, I think it's like at some point it was a mindset, like a mission, and then it just became part of my normal work and practice where it's like it's not as though I don't get heavy conceptual work. It's just that's not that exciting to me.
I don't get it a lot of the time.
It's not something I want to do, you know, personally.
Yeah.
And so that manifests itself in the way that I choose my subject matter, choose my working practice, or working methodology. But I always find like the idea, I think it's just like, I was having this conversation with someone about the idea of selling out. And I said that the context of selling out has changed and the way that it looks has changed. Because for me, selling out isn't like going pop in a way.
Yeah. It's
like putting on this facade of being underground.
Yeah, the fugazi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I'm like constantly interacting with like communities where it's like street art and things that have branched out from that.
Right.
And no one's fucking doing graffiti.
Yeah.
Everyone's doing street art and vinyl figures that can be put in the gallery and made into something bigger.
People are like, wow, the streets, look, this is what the streets look like.
Yeah. And everything is like that horrible sort of cause style or riffing on a popular figure.
Yeah, bro.
Especially like a playfully subverted or...
It's like Mickey Mouse, but it's sad.
Yeah. It's like that shit, you know what I mean? Yeah. In fact, I'm actually kind of studying it a bit. I think like I have this idea.
It's worth looking into.
If something makes me upset, I usually like to do it, you know? But like, and I think to me that's more selling out now in like contemporary sense because...
So the second time I've said this, well, I shouldn't have even pointed out, but to Tarantino it, I had to go pee conversation about the South and sort of regionally specific imagery is that there was something that eventually occurred to me that was disingenuous about my usage of not necessarily exactly what I was doing, but a fear maybe that like manifests that there was
I mean, you certainly caught shit for it, you know.
Well, yeah, but I caught shit for it almost for the wrong reasons, like, and I didn't catch
because people didn't get it, you know.
Right, and I didn't catch as much shit as other people. Like, I caught shit as if I was really a redneck, right? Like, people were like, "Oh my god, like I can't believe you're showing this abhorrent culture. Like, these people deserve, you know, no time in the sunlight." Like, this is the thing that Jack White and I would talk about.
Yes.
It's that, like, there is something, like, unique to a sort of localized aesthetic that one may be like a little bit alien to some people, but also to the people that are familiar with that, like
taking advantage of culture.
Well, so that's the negative side. The positive side is that, like, I do remember we were talking about this earlier with like regional aesthetics, which we don't really have anymore. Is that for a period of time, like when if you grew up somewhere that was like outside of the major cultural centers of this country, and you were maybe a weirdo or you felt disconnected from the sort of existing like social hierarchy, you found ways within the aesthetics that you had available to yourself. So like if you're in the South, that's probably like camo shit. Maybe that's like dirty South rap or whatever. Yeah. Use what you have available to like create a culture that you can exist within that makes you feel comfortable, or maybe like
you can remake your world in a way.
Yeah, it makes you feel maybe less alone.
Going from a context that makes you feel alienated to like something that you make that is you make yourself a home, which is
exactly
a classic archetype.
Rich city people like looking at any sort of like Southern aesthetic and being like, oh, like stupid conservative rednecks, when it may actually be like, some potentially like radicalized individual that just happens to live in a rural setting and has used the aesthetics available to them to craft something around themselves to provide like a shell within that community. That analysis of that sort of anger towards them would be bullshit, I would say. Yeah. So there's value to using like something you're familiar with within your work, which is what I would try to do. Maybe like these were images that, if we're talking about like NASCAR, or country music, or football, or Greek culture, or like any sort of Southern academics, college culture, like it was within those like auras that I had tried to craft like some idea of self or whatever. And this is 2016, so all work has to be identity related to some degree. So like that's what you get. The reality is that like it ends up being fetishized to a degree. There's a real slippery slope you go down with that was when we were in art school, like what the entire realm was. So of course my work for a while was like about the South, but then I eventually felt like I had fetishized the whole thing. And quite frankly, again, like I grew up on a cul-de-sac in a very like normal, regular town that looked like any of the fucking corny movies from the past 40 years. And the only but
it was like and I still really like that stuff. But it's like,
me too.
But I understand like the desire to move from it. I also understand not the criticism, because I feel like the criticism is very unfounded. But I understand why you would respond to the criticism.
Right. Well, I guess what I eventually felt is that like my reality within my youth. Not that I think I'm not trying to make like work about my adolescent period or inability to escape from that. Which, but I think that the coping mechanisms that we use and the developmental stages we all went through, like during that period of time, within our own adolescence, that still is grounded in the fact that like how normal my life was for the majority of the time, like is so universally felt, and the mechanisms I use to either escape that or try to like make something alternative out from it were within like attachments to certain subcultures, whether it be like music, film, the internet, whatever. Like, and that desire comes from a place of discontent or loneliness or whatever, the same things that we keep talking about over and over again, and so continues to be relevant. So the idea of like trying to find some being or self or place within like the oddities of the world and trying to like dissect and explain these currents that seem to be kind of dangerously directing our culture, it continues to be relevant for me. So it can still be about the same shit. It just doesn't have to be so like aesthetically Southern. Right? Like
the other thing that I really liked about it was relating to this idea that I also had, which is like the sensitivity to the political landscape expanded outward, and all of a sudden everything was very sensitive. And the idea of like cultural appropriation being the biggest topic. I was wondering how challenging it would be to culturally appropriate your own culture.
Well, so that's kind of where I thought I was. I thought that's what I was doing, right? Like that. And God, I hate to keep bringing him up. You'll have to have an image. Jack, as someone from the South, knew and was aware of the fact that like I'm not a hillbilly.
Yeah.
And much of what I was trying to get across within my own like personal reflection on my work. This wasn't what I was trying to like make a thesis out of, but ultimately I wanted acceptance, right? And for the time being, when I was growing up, that meant acclimating to this sort of rural Southern culture that I felt actually alienated from and not a part of. And so, in terms of making work about that, yes, essentially like appropriating the imagery of the area I'm from to almost fetishize it, like for the past 4 years, we've been trying to figure out what the fuck's wrong with like rural white America.
Yeah.
And it's a very hot topic. And so someone that has access to that and can like maybe dissect the nuance of what the fuck is the deal with people that live outside of like the center urban areas.
Valuable.
Right, has some value to it. Which initially instilled to me,
until
think,
they decided that they weren't going to listen to those opinions, and they're just going to cast them off into the political wastebasket.
Is where we're at now. Because apparently we solved everything, but so we don't have to worry about that anymore. So that means I'm out of the fucking market. But no, I was trying to like, and I still, because again, I want to be clear. Like I'm not. There's. It is fugazi in a sense for me to like use and capitalize on a like real like hillbilly working class aesthetic. It's more that like that was something I sort of latched onto to try to find like some sense of being or belonging or place within the area that I like grew up within, and then after having left there, try to find some sense of definable structure to how I ended up as such, right? Like.
How did we get here?
Yeah, so I can't help but have a fascination with like the aura that surrounded me throughout much of my life and the sort of mysticism of it, the method of storytelling, where my family's from, all these things, but it is tricky because you don't want to, or I don't want to set the precedent that like I am part of that culture, right? No, so but this sort of like pervasive, almost undeniable feature of our mass cultural identity as like this drive towards destruction, and being multiple sides of it. One, like it seems mighty fucking narcissistic to assume that you're going to bear witness to the end of civilization, right? Like we ought to get over ourselves. It's gonna stagger on forever. Like
I think it might be like. There might be this thing of desire to destroy so that can be rebuilt.
I think so, maybe. Also, I think that like my interest in a lot of the survivalist ephemera came about as a result of like, one, I collect those magazines, and I try to pair like the sort of performative prepper mentality with like the absolved liberal, like the people that like Ellen and Oprah and whatnot, and like to maintain like the goodness of the world. As like sort of oppositional factors.
There's like a synthesis that can be made between those points.
Yeah, well, so I've been trying to put together this entire like
like a Martha Stewart survival kit.
Contemporary demonology is something I've been trying to work out, but like for the survivalist who maybe they have a family or whatever, but they've deemed themselves like they're preparing themselves for the end of the world, right? So they are committing like substantial capital to
space and
time and labor, emotional
like,
labor, which I fucking hate that term, but
it's like if you're like my father, if you're like a defense contractor overseas as a civilian, you need to take all these courses in preparation for something happening. You know what I mean?
In case something happens, right?
And it's like information that you are never going to use outside of that context.
Right. So which is the point that there's a line between like cautionary
like things you should
preparedness,
have. Like things
right? Like you have a flashlight around. There's a Rubicon or whatever that's crossed where you can't help but from a psychoanalytical standpoint, determine that these people at a certain level want the destruction they're preparing for to happen. If it doesn't happen, then they've wasted all their time, right?
A lot.
And I think a lot of the decisions that we do in our reckless behavior and our drive towards this sort of mutually assured destruction is rooted in part, a desire for something to happen. And that our lives have become so lonesome and tiresome
it's like
and tame.
This would be the chance for you to be the hero.
Right, which is what,
this is your chance
back to the X-Men comment, like, this is what we all always wanted, right? We're sitting around all this time waiting for something to happen. And finally something may happen, right? And so you prepare for it. But ultimately you want it to happen, because or else what the fuck are you putting aside?
Space all the time of, like...
And that is like a hugely, I would say, disillusioned and problematic and ill perspective to take on things. Like the core, I guess, ethos of a lot of this shit I've been doing is that it doesn't fucking work, right? Like, I made a urinal that recycles my own urine to, well, not yet.
I love this.
When it's fucking done.
I love the way that it's going. I think you should keep
all
that stuff on the bottom there.
Oh, all this stuff's going to be down there. Eventually it's going to have a whole apparatus of pumps and shit that I'm making, because I want it to be the Ouroboros. It will use my piss to flush my piss, right? Like, it's a self-sustained 2-person urinal, which is sort of paradoxical, right? Like,
but it's like when a single guy buying like a sedan,
right? The longing. Maybe eventually I'll have someone to pee in here with, but the idea was that these self-contained systems, like, beginning of the quarantine, everyone's buying up bleach, hydrogen peroxide, paper towels, baby diapers, so on and so forth. We're buying all these things. Not
even like the individuals. Like people, I feel like you could buy bleach, but like they were sold out of like the wipes.
Oh, they were out of fucking everything. But I got interested in this horror mentality of like the idea that we can save ourselves somehow by preparing for this disaster that we inevitably want to happen because we spend all the time fucking buying all this shit for it.
Right.
And all of that looped within this very like individualized sort of current contemporary political mentality of the self, or whatever, the me politic. Like, what does it look like or mean to take every aspect of yourself that you deem so important and refract it into everything that you make, and for everything to be entirely like self-contained? And the ultimate result, I found, is that it doesn't work. It doesn't accomplish what you need it to happen, which is the only way I can sort of validate doing this from my political standpoint, is that, like, as a person, I feel like we need a sort of communal empathetic viewpoint. And so when I do these things and they inherently do not work, they're a failure. They're a reflection of like my own desperate attempt to manifest something of value out of my loneliness, and it doesn't work.
It's like you have to... It's like sort of saying, in a way, or like the long end, it's like sort of saying in a way, like, this strategy that, for me, is artwork.
Yeah.
For me personally, or like, as you.
Yeah, I mean,
but for other people, it could be like survival mechanics, political identity, like corrosive ideology.
Yeah, wow, yeah.
Like,
good term.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Corrosive as in, like, this doesn't make anything better. You're just like,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the thing about, like, me and my the Discord that I joined is, like, there's so many kids there that are, like, 14, 15.
Uh-huh.
And it's, like, and you get to see firsthand people adapting, like, reprehensible politics for the means of escaping their cultural surroundings.
Exactly.
And it's like, normally I don't give a shit, because it's like, you don't think I've been in your shoes.
Yeah, it's like, fuck off, kid, but...
Yeah, like, when I was a kid, I was, like, super communist, shit, like, didn't understand, like, Che Guevara posters and whatnot.
Well, everyone had those.
Yeah. And as, like, a reaction against my circumstance, and then when things became politely liberal, it's like, it became conservative.
Yeah.
Far right, even. And when you interact with that, you understand that, like, their plans for, like, the things that they want to do, it's like, you're not gonna...
Mm-hmm.
That's not realistic, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, but really what they want is to be listened to.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
to be validated, maybe.
Yeah.
Or,
and I think that's the kind of idea. It's like what you express as a desire to manifest selfhood out of alienation through artwork to you, with the sense of with this idea of failure, connects to an attempt other people might have that might go into ways that are a little bit that may be more destructive, harmful, and maybe not necessarily literally, but certainly, but possibly to themselves.
Yeah.
And the end result, which you hope to be, is like, you grow out of that. I certainly I look back on that stuff and I was like, that was an experimentation. That was testing my boundaries. That was me trying to go as far and like someone saying no.
Mm-hmm.
And then you learn about it and you're like, okay, I'm through with that. It's like, that's this learning moment, that experience moment, because there's this idea, I guess, now that the people who are currently expressing that are past the point where they should be growing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, I think that's just like a great thing to explore.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that shit out, because.
All right, cool. That's like 4 hours of.
Fuck, dude. Yeah. Are you do you edit these down?
Yeah, it's gonna be tough.